Alright, now we are going over the second round of the Melee DPS. With this round, I have actually chosen 4 specs that have had a similar situation happen to them in Shadowlands. This is the most repeated situation that you have heard already, which is the one where the spec gets some quality of life improvements, the spec gets some of cool things back, sometimes from Legion, sometimes from BFA, but overall the strengths and weaknesses remain the same compared to what they had in BFA. So we're gonna start with Unholy Death Knight. So Unholy Death Knight, what was Unholy in BFA? Strengths and weaknesses, things that could improve. Unholy DK in BFA was extremely immobile, very slow, and had a crippling issue when it came to switching targets. Their damage was amplified inside their Death and Decay, as well as on the targets with festering wound stacks, which means changing targets, even worse, changing target that's far away from you, which also goes to touch on your mobility, was a problem. Strengths, extremely strong defensives. Icebound Fortitude, Anti-Magic Shell, now they have Lichborn baseline, and now they also have Anti-Magic Zone baseline. Very strong, single target, cleave AoE, as well as burst, in any scenario. Now, what changes in Shadowlands? So, first of all, first and foremost, your mastery. Your mastery now scales with pet damage. All your pets, from your gargoyle to your ghoul, to your spawned ghoul from a legendary, they scale with pet damage. And your mastery, which is extremely strong and powerful. It's gonna scale later on in the expansion. Is gonna near guarantee that your spec is going to be viable later on. As you know, some specs fall off terribly later on in the expansion, either because they scale badly or because their counterparts scale out of control, like a Fire Mage every single expansion. Another good change, Sudden Doom. Sudden Doom used to affect only Death Call for a free cast. Now it affects Epidemic too. It was always very triggering to pull 5 mobs and then have to dump your free proc on a single target ability when you're fighting 5 of them. Now you can actually properly sustain your AoE with free casts of Epidemic, thanks to Sudden Doom. Dark Transformation now gives your pet 100% energy. When you use it, this is more of a min-max thing. You no longer need to have this clunky interaction where you want to pull the energy of your pet before using Dark Transformation, because you want him to have full energy during your burst and his burst. Now it's automatic. As I mentioned, some new things, some new baseline things. Lichborn, Anti-Magic Zone are pretty good. You got some new Rune Forges. None of them are particularly strong for Unholy. So there are strong ones for DK, but more around Blood, as well as Frost. Especially Rune of Hysteria for runic power generation, which is more of a thing about Frost DKs and Breath of Sindragosa than it is for Unholy. Now, the really cool thing about DK is that they actually have some of the more versatile and different and viable legendaries and covenants. Legendaries. Amongst most of the specs I've seen and tried, the non-spec specific legendaries are all garbage and ignored, and everyone just looks at their specific ones. But DK also has some viable neutral ones. Pheromones gives you a 10% tasting inside your Death and Decay, which is very strong, especially early in the expansion with low stats. Super Strain triples your dots from just 1 to the one from Blood DK and the one from Frost DK if you're playing Unholy, which is again very strong at the start of the expansion because it's free damage. Since you have shit stats and do shit damage, you can get baseline passive damage in the background to help you. The spec-specific ones, though, are pretty good. Reanimated Shambler is extra AoE and extra help in spreading Festering Wound, although it's random. Frenzied Monstrosity is the exact opposite. It's a big steroid that you exactly get to choose when to use it. That Certainty is going to make your Death Coil reduce the cooldown of Death and Decay by 2 seconds, and Deadliest Coil is going to increase the duration of your Dark Transformation by 2 seconds. This can nearly double the duration of your Dark Transformation. It's actually very good. And that Certainty allows you to have 100% uptime on your Death and Decay. And when it comes to Covenants, it's a similar situation. Kyrian is a high, stable, sustained single target damage. Swarming Mist is similar in AoE. Constant AoE damage on a 1 minute cooldown, and at capped targets it also gives you back 135 runic power. Very strong. Abomination Limb is sort of weird. It's like the black sheep of the 4. People will take it for the memes, but it's not very strong. And then that's Due from Night Fae, which changes, and also why DKs are so triggered. It changes your Death and Decay into Death's Due, which gives you a stacking 1% strength buff up to 15%, as well as, this is actually also worthwhile, 1% reduced damage, stacking to 15%. Now you can see that if you use this with Death Certainty, where you get reduced cooldown on your Death and Decay, you can keep this up all the time. Overall, the spec has improved in nearly all the things it was good at already and didn't really fix any of the issues. So it's all about whether or not you think those issues are big enough to prevent you from playing, really. You know, the mobility, the target swapping are still the problems that they had before. They still have, I have to mention, GCD issues in their openers. You know, you have to start with Outbreak to put down your dot, and then you put down Death and Decay, and then you Festering Strike a couple of times, and then before starting with your burst, you go with Unholy Blight if it's talented, maybe Army of the Dead, maybe your Covenant ability, and then Apocalypse, Summon Gargoyle, Dark Transformation, Unholy Assault, and then you can start Scourge Striking. You know, it's like 10 GCDs, it's really, really clunky. So that's still an issue that I wish could have been solved, regardless of how the spec played. But beyond that, I actually enjoy Unholy. It felt like it was one of the more complete and all-rounded specs of Melee I tried. It was pretty enjoyable. And I feel it's gonna be pretty strong in Shadowlands. So on to Sub-Rogue. What was Sub-Rogue like in BFA? Don't consider the fact that it's unplayed and dead, because that's number tuning. Sub-Rogue was very strong, and it was likely the most versatile of all rogue specs, choosing between single target AoE cleave, target switching, since I'm talking about Unholy right before this, very, very strong in target switching, extremely strong defensives, very strong mobility, and also very, very strong burst in all the damage profiles it was good at. What changes in Shadowlands? Well, first of all, Rogue gets a bunch of boomer nostalgic stuff back. Shiv is back, Slice and Dice is back, and Poisons are back. For Sub, Poisons are rather irrelevant, Shiv is also irrelevant, it doesn't even have an extra effect like it does for Assassination. Slice and Dice is the only good one. Faster auto attacks are good for Subtlety because they have the Shadow Techniques passive, which means chance to generate extra combo and energy on your auto attacks, so Slice and Dice is good. Find Weakness, basically the only thing that changes in your talent tree is that Find Weakness is now baseline, 30% armor penetration for 10 seconds when you use Shadow Strike, by 6 seconds when you use Backstab or Shuriken Storm, so it's very easy to maintain. It's not yet another big brain 200 IQ stuff you have to do with Subtlety's opener and Burst window. It's much more simple. Talking about Burst window, Shadowlands went from having 2 charges at a 5-second duration to having a 1 charge and 8-second duration. This is going to split the playstyle. It's going to split the playstyle of playing with Dark Shadow, which gives you 30% damage in your Shadow Dance, or Enveloping Shadows, which gives you extra cooldown reduction on Shadow Dance on your finisher per combo point spent, and it gives you 1 extra charge. The extra charge is very strong, and it's likely going to be the way to go on release, because this means you can always line up your Shadow Dance with Symbols of Death. Symbols of Death having a 30-second cooldown means you can line it up with Shadow Dance, as opposed to Dark Shadow, which gives you much more damage, 30% more, but it still has a 1 minute cooldown and only has 1 charge, which means you won't be able to have, at the start of the expansion with low stats, enough cooldown reduction on your Shadow Dance to get it back off cooldown before Symbols of Death is ready again. But this will very likely, as I mentioned, change the more you scale with gear. When it comes to Covenants and Legendaries, some Legendaries are pretty good and varied. Mark of the Master Assassin is back, you know, the 100% crit chance out of stealth. Deathly Shadows, which is turning Vanish into a DPS cooldown. You have the Rotten, which is extra combo point generator as you enter Symbol of Death window of burst. Finality, flat 20% damage on your finishers, and then the broken one, Calistral Fragment. It could still be the best, but right now it's the best because it does about 5 times the damage of all the others, kind of broken. When it comes to Covenants, similar situations. Serrated Bone Spike is currently broken, does 1,000,000 damage compared to the other Covenants, so it's very difficult to gauge them. But none of the Covenants are going to change the way Sub is going to play. The good thing I should also mention is that Sub now adds Shadow Vault as a finisher for AoE, which is helpful. It doesn't do much damage, it's not a massive finisher, but it definitely helps in your AoE rotation. Overall, I'm sounding like a broken record, but if you enjoyed sub in BFA, all the 27 of you, you will continue to enjoy it. If you didn't enjoy sub in BFA, if it was because of damage tuning, then you will likely enjoy whatever spec does more damage, clearly. But if it wasn't because of damage tuning, then you shouldn't play it because nothing changed. Quality of life improvements, small and better versions of what you had before, like Rapture replacing Nightblade. Nightblade used to give you 15% more damage on the target, and now it's gone, meaning you are no longer cock-blocked every time you want to target swap, every time you want to do some quick damage on one target because it doesn't have Nightblade on. Now it's gone. Slice and dice for more attack speed, a longer Shadowlands duration in 8 seconds. All these tiny improvements compared to the BFA version, so that's a plus for me. It's a pretty good spec, and spoiler, since I haven't done Outlaw and Assassination yet, the one that looks the best out of rogues. So, Red Paladin now. Red Paladin was very good in single target and AoE in BFA, particularly centered around their burst. Similar to Elemental Shaman, they have a gaping hole when it comes to cleave, 2, 3, 4 targets. You know, 1 is for Templar's Verdict and 5 is for Divine Storm. In the middle, yeah, they have very good target switching as they don't have to maintain any debuffs on the enemy. They have no problem going from one to the next. Their mobility is still pretty bad. They only have a steed, which is not very good at all. They have extremely strong defensives for themselves to stay alive, and an immunity, which is important to distinguish. Immunities are always game-breaking and counter-breaking. They have received a bunch of new stuff, or given back old stuff, whatever, for free. Wake of Ashes is now baseline. It has been nerfed to only give you 3 holy power, but it's baseline, so not complaining. Hammer of Wrath is baseline, Consecration is baseline. You get your auras, which, spoiler, are completely shit. And then you have Light's Decree, Azerite Trait, and Empyrean Power Azerite Trait, 2 of the most used ones from BFA, cooked into your talent tree. So the thing with Red Paladin is that Red Paladin has always been a spec that is centered around massive burst and their wings. Somehow, someway, be it Legion or BFA, it was always, from legendaries to Azerite traits to corruption, it was always trying to find a way to extend the duration of your wings or reduce the cooldown of your wings, either one. This is sort of like an oppressive spell because it means everything you have to try to do with your character needs to center around that. And this is going to extend to your covenants and your legendaries. For example, when it comes to covenants, Blessing of the Seasons is going to be rather oppressive for you when you want to choose, because Blessing of Autumn, one of the cyclical blessings you can get from the Night Fae Covenant, is going to increase the cooldown recovery of your abilities 30% faster for 30 seconds, which is very strong when you are all about wings. And when it comes to legendaries, you start looking at them and they're not that bad. Relentless Inquisitor, you know, existed before, it wasn't that strong, but it's okay, especially at the start of the expansion. Final Verdict, better single target finisher, looks pretty good. Vanguard's Momentum, 2 charges of Hammer of Wrath and extra damage, okay. And then you have this. Hammer of Wrath extends Avenging Wrath by 1 second and deals 25% extra damage. Who cares about the damage? Read what it says. It's saying extends Avenging Wrath. That's it. That's all I had to know about this. That's all. That's all a Red Paladin is gonna care about. If you put this together with the Blessing of Autumn of the Night Fae, you're starting to get massive extensions of your wings. And at that point, it's all about extending your wings and making you stronger in wings. And that's basically all Ret is. It's all Ret was in BFA and what it continues to be in Shadowlands. There isn't really much to say, really. It's really similar to BFA. Some of the things have changed. You're getting Seraphim from Prot Paladin cooked into your kit, Holy Avenger from Holy Paladin cooked into your kit, extra possible burst. You can use Holy Avenger for the extra Holy Power generation, or Seraphim for the extra stats right before going into wings. Or both of those are going to work. So overall, when it comes to Red Paladin, again, the broken record is speaking. If you enjoyed BFA Red Paladin, you're going to enjoy it here, possibly even more, based on some of the changes. I particularly enjoy Wake of Ashes being baseline and the retaining of Empyrean Power and Light's Decree as Azerite traits not being lost. If you didn't enjoy it and you wanted something different, maybe a more smooth damage profile, maybe the ability to cleave, sorry, no legendary like Elemental Shaman to bail you out here, you still suck dick at doing cleave. So if you still had gripes with those problems, then they're still gonna be here in Shadowlands. So we are closing with Arms Warrior. Now, Arms Warrior didn't get a single talent changed coming into Shadowlands. Literally the entire tree is the same, with also very few changes in the tree. It's like the same spec. You don't have the beta, you're a peasant. Go into BFA, take out all of your corruption and your Azerite pieces, and you've got Arms Warrior in Shadowlands. Now, What changed? So they have gotten some cool things, baseline, honestly. They've gotten Spell Reflection, which has a possible broken legendary, which makes you get AoE Spell Reflect on your party. Shattering Throw for breaking shields is back. Ignore Pain is a defensive. I know some people get triggered because it's a defensive that's gonna cost Rage, but it's still very, very good for survivability. Your defensive die by the sword has been reduced in cooldown from 3 to 2 minutes. Sweeping Strike lasts 3 seconds longer, which is pretty good. But the really big change is that Mastery Deep Wounds has been reworked. Instead of being a DOT, which gets increasingly bigger with the damage you do, your Deep Wound applications with Mortar Strike, Cleave, Bladestorm, whatever, are now instead going to put a much smaller dot on the target, which is also going to increase the damage you do to the target. This is a much better change. Even if it's just from a psychological reason. The fact that now your numbers, when you click something, are going to be much bigger than before. And you don't have 70% of your damage coming from a passive background DOT. Arms Warrior has some pretty good varied legendaries. You have, at the start of the expansion at least, Enduring Blow and Battle Lord are pretty good. Enduring Blow gives your Mortal Strike a 15% chance to apply Colossus Mesh on the target for 5 seconds, and Battle Lord gives your Slam a chance to reset the cooldown of Mortal Strike, which also works with Fervor of Battle, so you can Whirlwind and get the effect of this legendary. Exploiter is probably more of, again, a late game thing. Late game, haste, mega stacking type of thing, and then Unhinged is an extra single target help to your Bladestorm. Now, Arms Warrior was already pretty good at damage profiles. They had good single target, they had good AoE because of Bladestorm and if you wanted Warbreaker, but then you could also go Sweeping Strikes for 2 target Cleave, you could talent into Cleave for, 3, 4, 5 targets. Don't forget that before, your target switching was also somewhat weaker due to the fact that you needed to have Deep Wounds on the target for extra damage that you had built up over time. Now you don't anymore. Now all you have to do is just apply it once and you get the percentage extra damage taken on the target. So you are also getting better at target switching. Your mobility is fine, you have charge, Intervene is back, you still have leap, you're perfectly fine in mobility. Your covenants are also pretty straightforward. You have Condemn, which changes your execute to be a stronger execute, single target ability. You have Spear of Bastion, which is a decent single target ability, but is also a very good AoE ability that if you want. You have Ancient Aftershock for Nightfire, which is a flat out AoE ability. And lastly you have the Cuckshed ability. You have the E-Girl support ability, Conqueror's Banner. I hope you have a tank in your guild and he's forced to take that and not you as a DPS, because it's an extremely strong covenant, except not for you but for your party or your raid. So not many DPS will enjoy taking that. But yeah, the assessment is the same for arms. They have been improved over BFA in a few things. In mobility they have been improved, in defensive they have been improved, technically they have the possibility of having even more group utility. They still have the same problems that are going to block out people from wanting to play arms. Arms is rather slow at the start of an expansion, it's clunky, it is not GCD capped, which means once you press your abilities, they're all gonna be on cooldown or you will be starved of rage, so you've got nothing to do for several seconds. This is gonna be the same at the start of every expansion every time. As long as your stats are gonna be low and the scaling of your borrowed powers or whatever are still at the start of the expansion, it will feel slow. But the tools are all there, they are still there, so to me arms is pretty good as the way it functions. If it won't be at the start of the expansion, it's purely a numerical problem. It will not be because it's, it's fundamentally broken and it will not work. I wouldn't worry too much at the start. And with this we finish our second round of melee DPS specs. They have been put together, as I mentioned at the start, because they were all very similar. Changed from BFA to Shadowlands in several quality of life improvements and changes for the better smooth rotations, although the weaknesses have remained mostly the same. Small mention to Arms Warrior having a faster and better target swapping, same for Sub-Rogue, and better management of pets by the Unholy DK, but most of the stuff has remained the same, just better to play, in my opinion. And to finish, I am still accepting bribes for not making me play Survival Hunter. Please, I really don't want to. Anyone save me? Please?